Alright, so here's a build that I've been wanting to put together and test out for quite some time. Necrochasm has some hidden arc synergies, so I wanted to pair this with Stormcaller, mainly because on Warlock we have access to Necrotic Grips, which further enhances Necrochasm. So I'm kind of double synergizing here with Necrochasm, you know, by using an arc subclass and Necrotic Grips. So the Cursed Thrall explosions actually do arc damage, and we can get ionic traces from that arc damage. Furthermore, we could actually blind targets along with those Cursed Thrall explosions using Spark of Brilliance, which I'm not using here in my finished, my fine-tuned loadout, but I was testing it out, and you can definitely do that. So Spark of Discharge, Spark of Brilliance, synergize with Necrochasm, and then obviously Necrotic Grips to spread the poison. As you can see, I'm also using Spark of Beacons. So basically, Spark of Beacons is going to enhance my Indebted Kindness. If you get Wall Amplified, and being on Warlock is one of the easiest ways to get Amplified. I believe you get Amplified just from picking up Ionic Traces with Electrostatic Mind. And while you're Amplified, any arc special weapon kills that you get are going to set off a Blinding Explosion. This is actually super good. I've used this fragment in the past doing solo flawless dungeons with like Forbearance. You know, every kill that you get with Forbearance sets off a Blinding Explosion. It's pretty clutch for crowd control and survivability. So I wanted to do that for Indebted Kindness as well, because we all know how good Indebted Kindness is, the new sidearm that launched with Warlord's Ruin. I've got a few good rolls on Indebted Kindness. The one that I've been sticking to the most, though, is Impulse Amplifier and Volt Shot. Impulse Amplifier makes it so that the sidearm is basically hit scan. So you know, you can use it at range and successfully hit your targets without having to worry about velocity. And it gives you very snappy reload, so it gives you easier procs on Volt Shot. You know, you can basically just shoot, kill and add, reload, shoot, kill and add, reload, and you're constantly going to be applying Jolt. And so the Jolt is kind of synergizing with Necrotic Grips and Necrochasm because, you know, all this is damage over time, right? So we're doing damage over time from the poison and from all of the Jolt and Chain Lightning, right? Necrochasm is actually getting a buff next season as well. Bungie has stated that they're gonna, you know, they've noted that the community is overall not too happy with Necrochasm compared to like Osteostriga and Thorn. So they are going to be giving it a buff. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that does. And it is still effective even right now, but this did take me quite a while to get some good gameplay and at 50 wave completion. And as you can see here, I'm actually using Thorn at times. This was not from my 50 wave completion run, but I just wanted to throw these clips in here because Thorn is very good. I would say overall I would prefer to use Thorn with Necrotic Grips, but you know, because Thorn applies poison on hit, and hand cannons are just in a very good state right now compared to auto rifles, which are not. And even though this is the same archetype as like Quicksilver Storm, it just doesn't seem to hit as hard because it doesn't have like those nanotech tracer rockets. It doesn't have the grenade special option, you know, and it really relies on you hitting those crits and getting the reloads for the faster fire rate and setting off Cursed Thrall explosions. So overall, Necrochasm is a lot more conditional to use for damage compared to something like Quicksilver Storm, and it's not as easy to use for Necrotic Grips and spreading poison as you know, Osteostriga and Thorn. I would say Osteostriga is still the best, but Thorn's in a really good state. Like I said, hand cannons are just doing very good. And one thing that you could take away from this build is that you could basically use this exact same build and then just switch between Necrochasm and Thorn depending on whether you are in a Onslaught mission with Hive versus Fallen. And you don't have to. There's other ways to stun Unstoppables, obviously, but that is the thing, right? So Necrochasm is taking care of overloads for us this season, so it's good in Fallen missions. And then as far as the unstops go, we have hand cannons, and Hive have unstoppable ogres. So you could just put this build on, put Thorn on for Hive missions, put Necrochasm on for Fallen, and you know, get by just fine like that. So we've got a couple ways of getting our poison going with Necrochasm, right? And I'm kind of playing 50-50 between, you know, spreading Jolt and spreading poison, but you know, most of this video is focused on obviously the poison and Necrochasm. So how are we getting our poison sources? Well, obviously you don't need a Weapon of Sorrow to pair with Necrotic Grips if you have an optimal melee that you can use to consistently poison targets. And so that's why, like, Strand is so popular with Necrotic Grips, is because you get 3 arcane needles, and then it's even further enhanced with stuff like Weaver's Trance, where you know, all the poison that you spread suspends everything, and you know, just super good for that. But yeah, having 3 arcane needles means that you can pretty much poison, you know, everything everywhere all the time. Whereas with the other subclasses, you have to wait on a longer melee cooldown, and they don't necessarily have the same fragments and whatnot to get fast melee ability regen, right? But even though Ball Lightning, which is the melee that I'm using here, Ball Lightning, does have a longer cooldown than Chain Lightning, it is better because it is a ranged melee, so I can poison groups of enemies at range. And the Ball Lightning does more damage, I would say, than Chain Lightning. Obviously, Chain Lightning, like, I have to be, you know, enemies have to be right up next to me for me to set off that Jolt. But the nice thing about Arc is that you do get fast ability regen. So even though we don't have, you know, 3 arcane needles, or 3 charged melees in general, we only have 1, but we can get some very fast ability regen on Stormcaller, especially because of all the ionic traces with Electrostatic Mind and Spark of Discharge, right? So any enemies that I kill with my weapons, so with Indebted Kindness, with Song of Uriut, and with Necrochasm's Curse Thrall Explosions, they're all going to give me ionic traces. And then other than that, my Arc Soul is giving me traces, my Ball Lightning is giving me traces, my Grenade is giving me traces, Chaos Reach, right? So Electrostatic Mind gives you ionic traces for killing basically anything with Arc, right? Your Arc abilities or your Arc verbs, right? You kill blinded targets, Arc blinded targets, so that's where Spark of Beacons comes in. I get ionic traces, right? So sometimes you'll see, like, I get 2 ionic traces from defeating a blinded or jolted target, right? Because my weapon could give me a trace from Discharge, and then Electrostatic Mind is giving me a trace from defeating arced debuffed targets. So with all the ionic traces, we get more ability regen, right? We get, you know, pretty good ability uptime. And then to enhance that even more, I'm running quad 100s here. So, well, I mean, obviously resilience is not giving us any ability regen, but it's giving us that maximum damage resistance from resilience. And then I've got 100 recovery, 100 strength, 100 discipline as well, thanks to armor charge. So that way I can keep the maximum uptime on Ball Lightning specifically, but also putting down my Rift for my Arc Souls, giving my teammates those Arc Souls, and throwing grenades out to Jolt. You know, so the more abilities that I have up at a time, whether it's from my Rift, my Grenade, or my Melee, the more traces I'll have in general, which just means that looping those abilities is just going to be more frequent, right? So more Ball Lightning, more Poison, and that just adds to the mix. As far as our Jolt sources go, and why Jolt is important other than giving us ionic traces is, you know, we have Overload champions, not necessarily, you know, if we're up against Hive, we don't have Overloads to deal with, but it is useful to apply Jolt to beefier targets because it does reduce their damage output, kind of like Sever, right? Anything that applies Overload reduces enemy damage output, so it's basically a form of damage resistance, which a lot of people don't know. They think that, oh, you only need to use overload if there are overload champions, and that's not the case. It works on all enemies, right? You can overload all enemies. I think it's coded in the game as like disruption, right? But basically it reduces their damage output by about 25%, so it's pretty substantial, right? So Necrochasm is overloading everything for us, but so is Jolt, right? So our grenades are jolting thanks to Spark of Shock, and Indebted Kindness with Volt Shot is also overloading enemies, right? Indebted Kindness is in kind of a unique position this season because we have anti-barrier sidearm, so it means that as long as you have the mod on the seasonal artifact, you can one-shot barrier shields because it's a special weapon, but then additionally, if you proc that Volt Shot near an overload, you will stun the overload, right? And there's no conflict there in stunning champions because it's not like it technically doesn't have intrinsic overload. It's just the Volt Shot, right? It's just the jolt that is applied that stuns overloads, right? So Indebted Kindness can take care of 2 champions at once, but so can Necrochasm. Well, I mean, Necrochasm can take care of the overloads by itself very easily, and so can all of our jolt from our pulse grenades and whatnot. So yeah, so Necrochasm, I'm looking forward to the buff. Overall, I would say it is pretty tricky. Like, it really depends on what kind of team you're in to actually reliably get critical kills on enemies to get that poison going. Like, if you're in a fire team with somebody that's just slaying out with Sunshot and Galahorn and Dragon's Breath or Sun Bracers, like, yeah, you're probably not going to get too many Curse Thrall explosions going off because your enemies or your teammates are just going to be beating you to all the enemies, right? But yeah, so Indebted Kindness, you saw there, and about 30 seconds ago, I was just popping enemies off left and right with Indebted Kindness, and every single kill set off a blinding explosion. And the blinding explosion is basically like having a flashbang, right? And speaking of Indebted Kindness having the ability to collaterally stun overloads, well, it can collaterally stun unstoppables as well if you're using Spark of Beacons, right? It's not like it's going to happen all the time, but it is situational. Like, if there's an enemy next to an unstoppable and you proc Spark of Beacons off of that weaker enemy, it'll blind the unstop and stun them. So technically, this season, Indebted Kindness can stun all champions. So very good. I also have a couple other roles that I've been saving. I think I've got a lead from gold that I've been saving, but this thing is so good on ammo anyways that you don't really need lead from gold. And plus you get the ammo boxes, like every 10 waves you get 1 or 2 of them, so it's very easy to top up on your ammo. There's so many enemies to kill that you're just constantly getting ammo, so like I don't even need lead from gold. The other role that I've been hanging on to is beacon rounds with Volt Shot, but the one that I have doesn't have very good velocity, so it just doesn't feel good to use until beacon rounds are procced, and then you got that tracking enabled. But I will say it does synergize with Volt Shot because it requires you to get a kill and then a reload. So basically you kill, you reload, then you've procced Volt Shot and beacon rounds, and then you've got that tracking rocket. So it just means that you can kind of like have some carefree aiming, which is nice, but it also kind of encourages you to keep using Indebted Kindness to keep up those beacon rounds, and so that way you have those auto tracking rockets from the sidearm. Whereas if it's something that you use, you just pull out to use occasionally and stow, then you're going to lose those beacon rounds quite frequently, so you have to restart it every now and then. But overall, yeah, Indebted Kindness is just absolutely nuts. It basically feels like an exotic, and it just pairs very nicely with Necrochasm. You get that poison going with either your Ball Lightning or Necrochasm. Throw in a couple of Volt Shots from Indebted Kindness every now and then, and you've got damage over time galore going on. So pretty fun. Machine guns are also overcharged right now. at least as far as when this video is coming out. I believe tomorrow's reset, so we're probably going to get a a change in weapon surges, of course. Last week I put out 3 videos on glaives because glaives were surging. This week we've got machine guns and snipers. However, snipers not super useful for most builds in Onslaught. Well, except for here, right? I take that back. I'm actually using the Ikelos sniper, the solar one, because 2 shots will proc Radiant from the seasonal artifact, and then I can go to town with Thunderlord. But I'm using Song of Your Ute for just my general, wave gameplay to complement Necrochasm and Indebted Kindness. If we get rushed and there's just tons of enemies, I can pull out Song of Your Ute. The role that I'm using here, though, is not my standard role that I normally use with Demolitionist and Sword Logic. This is an adept version that I got from farming Master Cataclysm, I believe, or not Cataclysm, Crota, from farming Master Crota. Reconstruction, bait and switch. Reconstruction is super good on Warlock, especially because A, this isn't a grenade build, so I don't plan on reloading it with my grenades that much. Otherwise I would use Demolitionist, but and I don't have Marksman's Dodge on Hunter, so having Reconstruction on Warlock is just feels right. And bait and switch is super easy to proc on this thing, so when you combine the fact that machine guns are currently overcharged, or surging, whatever, they're doing 25% more damage from the weekly mod, and then bait and switch is 30%. So that's a lot of damage from a machine gun. So yeah, so the machine gun is basically just what I'm using to clear out ads fast. Don't have to worry about reload. Popping shoulders off of tormentors, very good for that, right? Linears are kind of awkward. Rockets are ineffective until the shoulders are popped. Machine guns are just really good at it. Forgiving, you can waste some ammo and not worry about it. So yeah, Song of Your Ute, very cool. Also, it has Cursed Thrall, and so I was kind of hoping that there was some synergy there. Like if I was to get some Cursed Thrall explosions going, maybe that would proc Necrotic Grips as well, because that is the idea behind Necrochasm, right? You set off Cursed Thrall explosions on precision kills, it spreads poison. So what happens if you switch over to Song of Your Ute after a melee kill and then proc Cursed Thrall explosions just from the origin trait? I can't tell really if it did anything at all, but I just wanted to try it out. And like I said, machine guns are surging. Song of Your Ute's a very good machine gun. It's arc, so it just goes with the build with the full arc build that I'm using here. Another nice thing about Thunderlord, so when I go to damage, I switch to a Geomags build, hop off Necrochasm, hop off Necrotics. Just use Thunderlord instead of Song of Your Ute. Thunderlord gives you so much super energy. Like, I'm actually in like waves 40 and 50 for those bosses. I was able to pop a minimum of 3 Chaos Reach supers just from using Thunderlord. So like I said, overall the stats that I'm rocking here: quad 100s, producing Ionic Traces to give me even more ability regen. And then my armor charge is also going to kinetic weapon surge, and then I swap over to my damage loadout for triple arc or double arc surges. I can't remember, but yeah, overall pretty good time. So I suggest you try it out. I'll leave a link in the description. See you next time.